Up for pre-order this weekend is one of the most bloodthirsty and wild factions in all of Age of Sigmar, one that I personally really love playing, and that is the Blades of Khorne, the followers of the Blood God, the collectors of skulls. And it looks as though they are getting some fairly hefty changes to their battle traits in their new book. So the old battle traits revolved around your blood tithe, which is when you killed your opponents or your units died themselves, you gained blood tithe points for each unit that was destroyed, and you could then spend those points at various points in the game, in various phases in the game, for specific buffs or abilities. So Murderlust was done in any movement phase, Spell Eater Curse was a reaction to when an enemy cast a spell, and that sort of thing. Now, however, that system has been replaced, and it still rewards you whenever a friendly or an enemy unit is destroyed. You still get those blood tithe points, but instead you spend those points to unlock an ability at the start of any turn, and you can do that once per battle round. And they've shown off what the table is going to look like. It's sort of this branching mechanic, so you get to unlock new abilities and powers as the game goes on. So the way it works is you start with Murderlust, which you unlock for free, and that gives you a once per turn ability to roll an extra dice after you've attempted a charge. So what you can do is you can replace one of those charge roll dice with that extra dice you roll. So say you needed an 8 for your charge and you rolled a 6 and a 1, you could then use this ability to roll another dice, and if you rolled, say, a 3, you could swap it for the 1 and you would make that charge distance. So it's a really cool and fluffy and actually quite powerful ability to bring to make sure that your units get into combat. It does have a downside, being Khorne, in that if you do use this ability, the unit that you use it on takes D3 mortal damage, so there is sort of a downside to getting this favour from the Blood God, but when you absolutely need a Bloodthirster or a unit of Bloodletters or some Skull Crushers getting into a certain combat, that can be game-changingly good, and it will really help with those annoying situations where you roll like a 6 and a 1, so you get a really good dice roll and a really bad one. You can then potentially change that to a much better average to get you some really reliable charges off. From there you progress down, and the first set of abilities that you need to buy with your Blood Tithe are Divine Scorn or Punish the Pacifist. You can do either of these for one Blood Tithe. Now, as I said, Murderlust says that it already starts unlocked, and since the Blood Tithe abilities can be bought with a Blood Tithe point once per battle round in either turn, I think that means that because you don't actually buy Murderlust, you can actually still use the Blood Tithe ability to unlock one of these in the first battle round. So say if you are going second in the first battle round and anything has died, then in your hero phase you could potentially unlock one of these. So this is a system that really can start early on in the game, and it really can start to snowball very, very quickly. In any event, Divine Scorn is unlocked for one Blood Tithe, and this gives you a once per turn ability to pick 3 enemy wizards or priests within 6 inches of a Blades of Khorne unit, and you roll a dice for each of them, and then on a 3+, they subtract 1 to their power level to a minimum of 0. And power level is what you use to see how many spells or prayers a wizard or a priest can chant or get off. So you can actually stop some low level wizards from being able to cast anything, because if you drop them down to a power level of 0, they then can't cast. So this is stupidly powerful in some situations. It can absolutely demolish an enemy army's battle plan if they were relying on a few spells or prayers or manifestations to help boost their army up. We also get told about the other option, although we don't actually see the written rules for it. Punish the Pacifist apparently harms a unit that is trying to get away from combat, so probably something along the lines of doing some mortal damage to an enemy unit or to your unit. They do say if it tries to retreat from a combat. So for a melee army like Khorne, you probably aren't going to be retreating all that often, so this should be mostly a positive for you, stopping some enemy units from trying to get away from you and just keeping them locked into melee so you can keep claiming those skulls for Khorne. Following on from that, as more stuff dies in the game, you can then proceed down to the next track. So Divine Scorn unlocks Murder the Mystic or Glorious Combat or Naught, whilst Punish the Pacifist unlocks Glorious Combat or the Revel in Battle option. It's worth noting here, I'm not sure if you are locked to a track, so to speak, so I don't know if you could unlock Divine Scorn, and then with your next Blood Tithe point in the next battle round, choose to unlock Punish the Pacifist, rather than having to progress sort of down the tree towards the end game. I don't know if it would be worth doing, but I don't see anything in the article that says you can't just go sideways across a tree and unlock both of those abilities before you start moving further down. But either way, Murder the Mystic grants you the option to pick 4 enemy manifestations in your hero phase, and you can attempt to banish them, which is great for the meta we're in at the moment, where there are a lot of manifestations around the battlefield. But also with this ability, if you do succeed on that banishment roll, you also do D3 mortal damage to each enemy unit within 3 inches of it. So if there is any healing or defensive manifestations that are up near to enemy units, you can banish them and get rid of their abilities to help support the army, but also turn them into mini bombs that will hurt your opponent's own units as you get rid of them. So it can be incredibly powerful if you're up against an army that does rely on a lot of manifestations and will have some of their units bunched up around them. Glorious Combat or Naught is instead a more defensive one. It gives your army -1 to be hit by enemy ranged attacks, so it forces the enemy to come to you and actually fight in melee more, which is of course exactly where you want to be and will be really, really useful for your army as this melee faction. The last option in this track is Revel in Battle. This is another passive that you unlock for actually a fairly pricey 3 Blood Tithe, so this is going to require a fair few units to die before you can get to it, but it brings you another incredibly powerful defensive buff. If an enemy charges you with one of their units, their weapons on that unit don't get any of their special abilities. So anything like crit mortals or crit auto wounds, anything like that won't go off. So in some situations, this can be devastating. Against an army like the Nighthaunt with all of their crit auto wounds on their weapons, they will be so much less impactful into you. But also on things like most knights or mounted units that get +1 damage on the charge, dropping that ability so that they're only 1 damage on the charge rather than 2 can mean a huge amount less damage is going into your units. The one thing it doesn't stop is companion weapon attacks, so things like big monsters and creatures, they will still get their attacks, but anything like +1 damage or crit mortals or crit 2 hits and that sort of thing will be blunted against you, so that is going to hugely improve your survivability against anything charging into you. But it doesn't stop there, the carnage does continue, and as more units get destroyed and blood is spilled for the Blood God, you proceed on to the next track. Now you get a choice of Slaughter Triumphant or Cleave Wide the Grin of Khorne. Both of these are a hefty 4 Blood Tithe, so you do need to make sure in this army that you bring enough chaff units and things like Flesh Hounds to get those valuable Blood Tithe points. But Slaughter Triumphant is a very simple +1 to all of your units' attacks when they charge. This is incredibly strong when you have things like 4 damage Bloodthirsters or Bloodletters with crit mortals. They will love getting 3 attacks each instead of just 2. And then the other option, Cleave Wide the Grin of Khorne, which is fantastically named by the way, that just gives you a flat +1 to your hit rolls. This does seem to be, at least from the face of it, all the time, so it's not when you just charge or when you get charged or anything like that. It seems to be just a flat +1 to hit, so this is also very, very strong. Bloodletters, again, hitting on 2s is incredibly good for their output, whilst your Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage, for instance, can now be hitting and wounding on 2s with 2 rend and a flat 5 damage, so this ability really will turn him into an absolute monster of destruction. So this new way of doing the Blood Tithe, I really, really like it. I think it's a lot more fun. I think it's a lot more interactive, and it seems more powerful to me. So I really, really like it, and I hope it turns Khorne into this army that is a little bit less techie. Don't get me wrong. I love the idea of not just being a move forward and charge faction, but sometimes Khorne felt a little bit too movement focused and techie focused instead of being just this devastating melee army. And I think this will help you if you do like the idea of just charging up, getting into combat and spilling blood for the Blood God. This seems like it's going to be a better way to kind of envision that. There is also a final part of your battle traits, the awesome Blood-drenched rule. This is a rule that you can use once per battle in any hero phase, but it essentially does a big army-wide rest of the game buff for you. The trigger for it is that at least half of the total units in the battle from both players' armies have to be destroyed, and then you can unleash the Tide of Blood. Now, this sounds a little bit confusing on the face of it, but it's really not. Essentially, what the trigger is that you count how many units you and your opponent have, and it's half that number. So you don't have to have, say, half your army dead and half the opponent's army dead. It is just half the total amount. So as the ability says, it gives you a really clear description about it. If you have 9 units and your opponent has 4, that would be a total of 11. So you would need 7 units to be destroyed from both armies, like in any combination. So it could be 3 of yours, 4 of your, well, no, because then your opponent would be dead. It could be 5 of your units and 2 of your opponents. Then you would hit that figure of 7 and you could use this ability. And what this rule does is when you enact it for the rest of the battle, you get several effects, and they impact your various units, your different units in various ways. So the first one is Wild-Eyed Brutality. This is actually a downside of the ability. It means that you essentially ignore positive save modifiers for your units, meaning you can no longer get buffs to your save. So things like All-Out Defense, which give you +1 to your armor save, they will no longer work on you. So you do essentially lose some durability and defense by using this, but instead you get some massive damage output buffs. So Blood Haze, this grants your blood-hungry weapons, which is a new keyword on your weapons apparently, but it grants your blood-hungry weapons on your bloodbound units the crit mortal rule, which is apparently going to be an improvement on the crit auto wound that they will now have on their gore weapons. So it seems like Blood Warriors and that sort of thing may be getting a buff anyway, but then you can get a further buff with this ability to get crit mortals instead of crit auto wounds. Weapons of Murder gives you +1 rend on your blood-hungry weapons used by non-monster demons. So this isn't things like your Blood Warriors, this is things like your Bloodletters. They will now potentially be hitting 2 rend, which is a huge improvement and really will allow them to just smash through even heavily armored enemies much more easily. And then finally, Blood Lord Supreme is the third buff you get. This gives you +1 damage on the blood-hungry weapons for your monster units. Again, it's a super powerful buff, and it will get your bloodthirsters and that sort of thing up to some terrifying damage output. If it stays like it is now, and again, we don't know if it will, but if it stays the same as it is, that can potentially be getting you up to 9 damage on Skarbrand's Carnage attacks, so it can be brutal. And even on things like your regular Bloodthirsters, you're looking at sort of 5 or 6 damage in some situations with this buff, so you really can cleave through even enemy cavalry and kill off multiple models at a time. It is incredibly strong, and it's just a really nice set of buffs that impacts your whole army, no matter what you're bringing. If you're going mortal heavy or demon heavy or monster heavy, these will all come into play in some effect, and it is just going to be a really great way and a really great reward to help you demolish the enemy even more as you get into that mid and late game and the casualties start to pile up. It will really help you to kind of push your side over the edge to win the battle and start clearing off those final enemy units as units from both sides have started to die. So the Blades of Khorne do look to be getting some incredibly cool and fluffy and also, I would say, fairly strong rules from this new battle tome. I, for one, am really excited to see just how they will play out in their new book and whether they are going to be just a bit more fire and forget. As I said, I don't want them to be too much fire and forget, but I would like them to be a bit more jump in and smash things up rather than being such a mobility tech heavy army like they are at the moment. But a good mix would be great, but certainly these rules that we've seen now do point in the direction of being a bit better in melee than they currently are, which for an army like Khorne, which is sort of meant to be the premier melee faction in the setting, is really nice to see, I think. But as always, I'd really love to know your thoughts on these new battle traits. Do you think they sound better than the current versions? And do you think they are going to make the Blades of Khorne into a really scary melee army in Age of Sigmar? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. And as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do like and subscribe for more Warhammer content from me. But until next time, I'll catch you later, guys.